Hello, and welcome to the North Asia Cape Need to Know series. I'm Amber Older. The North Asia Cape is committed to helping New Zealand businesses internationalize in China, Japan, and Korea. As part of this commitment, we host a monthly series of expert talks. The North Asia Cape recently hosted Nathalie Harrington, a young New Zealand lawyer who has spent some of her formative years in the Hunan province of China. Nathalie's talk, Don't Get Lost in Translation, examined the value of language acquisition to New Zealanders and to their businesses. Nathalie Harrington is with me now. Welcome.
Thank you.
So by way of background, you talked about being 9 years old when your mum brought you to live in rural China, where no one had ever encountered a foreigner. You needed to learn how to play the game of Tiggy with your young peers, make sure that you were included in these kind of games. So learning the language became an act of survival as much as an act of communication. How aware at the time were you of the monumental size of that task and what an achievement it was?
Absolutely unaware. I don't think I was able to conceptualize what it is and what it takes to learn a language until I was back probably towards the end of high school and even into university. At the time it was, as you say, an act of survival. Do you want to be included and recognized by the kids around you? If you can't speak to them, they won't give you the time of day. And I think being 9, I was young enough that that language learning process happens in a really natural way, and especially in an immersion environment. It didn't seem like something at the time that was too difficult or some sort of monumental task to be overcome. It was just more a daily struggle to say, you know, will the kids let me join in the scooter races? If I can't ask, then of course that's not going to happen.
So you really credit, looking back now, you credit that experience, that immersive experience, with getting you to where you are now and really who you are now, a scholar, a lawyer, and the recipient of the Prime Minister's Scholarship for Asia.
Yes, right.
So in that capacity, you've just returned from an 8-week intensive language program run by the prestigious International Chinese Language Program at the National Taiwan University in Taipei. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So how did that experience impact your beliefs about the role of language in our work, in our daily lives?
I think it confirmed a lot of things I already knew to some degree. So you cannot overestimate the value of being able to speak to someone in their own language and relate to them in a way that demonstrates you have an understanding of their cultural background. What it did cause me to stop and think about a little more carefully is the limitations that we face in terms of the huge amount of time it would take to really have a good grasp on another culture. And I don't think there is ever an end to that learning journey. I think that's just something that you need to keep immersing yourself in to ever be able to say, yes, I am familiar with Chinese culture or the culture of whatever other place you're operating in. I was convinced several weeks into the course to add into what was originally framed as an advanced business Mandarin course, to also introduce a focus on classical Chinese. Originally I pushed back a lot on that, thinking, you know, I'm here for a really specific reason. I want to be able to conduct myself in more professional settings and have more confidence to talk about clients' businesses or their plans for investing overseas, these sorts of issues. And one of my teachers ended up explaining it like this. She said, look, in any situation, no matter where in the world you are, if you're talking to people and having high-level discussions, of course people in their native tongue are going to use literary references and are going to start using a level of formality and a certain type of idiom that is always going to shut out the foreigner, no matter how good technically their language is. So if you want to ever claim to be proficient in business Mandarin, if you can say that's a thing in and of itself, then you need to have a really good understanding of aspects of classical Chinese. You need to understand a little bit more about Confucian thought and how stories from over 1,000 years ago have huge influence now in Chinese thinking, and how some of those things have entered into the modern Chinese vernacular. And as well, she pointed out that in any high-level discussion in an English context, you might have people throwing around Shakespearean references, and no one would think twice about that because we're all familiar with those people. So just in the same way, she said, look, unless you have some sort of, even just a rudimentary understanding of classical Chinese, that will open doors because you will be able to pick up on those same references. And if you can go a step further and start using them yourself, then that really demonstrates that you're at a level where you're ready to participate fully.
And I imagine there is a level of respect that is achieved when you are yourself citing literary references or references that are only possible through a cultural awareness and understanding.
Definitely, and I do not claim to be anywhere close to that level. I mean, the course I did was incredibly intense, but I only just scraped the surface of what you'd really need to be able to get that.
You gave in your talk an example of a colleague, I think, who was on this course who had extremely high-level language proficiency but really lacked a cultural understanding, and maybe you could just speak to that a little bit and what went wrong.
So a fellow student at ICLP, not a New Zealander, a student from the United States, really had a gift for language learning. To my understanding, he had never lived in a native Chinese speaking environment, and yet his language abilities were just incredible. Living in Taipei for him was the first time he had been in a Chinese speaking environment, and he was really engaged in political issues as well, and he had very, very strong views on the Communist Party in China, and was always keen to share those views. And the way he went about that ended up creating a few awkward situations, because what he missed in a lot of conversations were some quite obvious pointers that indicated other people around him were mainland Chinese for starters, and were also members of the Communist Party, like a lot of young Chinese professionals are. And even though his language abilities were really, really strong, because of his lack of time spent living there, there were some things he just couldn't pick up on. So, for example, there were people talking about having had quite high-ranking jobs within Chinese ministries at a relatively young age, and conversations about the people they had dealings with, including using titles that are related to people with positions of authority within the party. And because he couldn't pick up on that level of nuance, he wasn't able to make the connection that these people might be offended by the political views he was about to share so readily. So a good reminder that you can't just have the language skills and ignore the importance of immersing yourself in the culture as well.
Right. And of course, though, many people don't have the opportunity to go and spend 3 months or 3 years in the culture of the language that they're learning. So without the cultural component, the lived cultural component, is second language learning or language acquisition, is it meaningless?
Absolutely not. I think any amount of second language learning is hugely valuable. On a personal level, I think learning another language, and therefore learning about the culture, even without having a chance to experience it firsthand, can open your mind in so many different ways to thinking about how other people live and how other cultures are different from your own. But in terms of bringing that into the workplace, and this applies across the board, I think, demonstrating that you've taken the time and put in the effort to learn even a little bit of someone else's language goes a huge way to demonstrating that you value that person as an individual. You've thought about their cultural background. You are not taking it for granted that they are happy to operate completely on your terms and in accordance with your cultural practices. So language learning by itself is hugely valuable. Just wherever there is the opportunity, I think people need to think about finding ways to sort of deepen the cultural experiences as well.
Nathalie Harrington, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.